Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Nick Benson. I am the Director of the Office of Community Engagement here at the University of Iowa. I'm really happy to see you guys here to participate in a workshop that I'm really excited about. This is something that we've been talking about for a while, and we're really pleased to be partnering with our friends over at Iowa Minnesota Campus Compact, and we'll get to them in a second. One thing to note is today is going to be kind of interactive and there'll be a chance to talk and everything, but if you have any questions during the presentation or while other people are talking, please do feel free to use the chat, but we will have plenty of time to talk amongst ourselves as the workshop gets going. Today we're going to talk a little bit about sort of community engaged learning in the big picture and think about how sort of big systems and sort of the wicked problems of the world, and in particular, how the UN Sustainable Development Goals can sort of serve as a way for us to think about how do we work with students and how do we work with students in our classes. And so this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and something that we've been talking a lot about is how do we sort of think about how the issues that are facing our world can really be worked into the classes in which we're working and teaching. And so the great thing is that the University of Iowa is a member of Iowa and Minnesota Campus Compact. And the great thing is that Jane Turk is a fantastic director with Iowa and Minnesota Campus Compact. And we're really pleased to have her here today. And she's going to be leading most of the workshop, so I don't have to do much else today. It is one other thing is the workshop is being recorded, and so the material from today will be on our website after we're finished. So with that, unless if anybody has any questions right off the bat, I'm going to turn it over to Jane and have her introduce herself.
All right, thank you, Nick, and welcome everyone. I'll just take a second here to get my slides up. So nice to see all of you. My name is Jane Turk. I'm the Director of Member Engagement and Minnesota Operations at Iowa and Minnesota Campus Compact. I'm joining you today. I'll get to that in a little bit from St. Paul, Minnesota. And I'm really looking forward to our time together today. I think we're going to have a packed agenda, and I hope that you'll be able to leave today with having tried on a couple of activities, thought through some questions about your own motivations and your own course design, and hopefully leave with new ideas and some energy, maybe even around revisiting the themes and topics we talk about today in relation to your own course design, particularly with regard to community engaged learning. So one note I wanted to make, and perhaps this is already here, usually I would have this information out before, so I hope this doesn't take anyone off guard, but you will need a writing utensil and paper to fully participate in the workshop exercises today. So you'll be asked to jot down notes and do a bit of drawing. If for some reason you would prefer to use a digital device or have that will certainly work fine too, but drawing is a piece of this workshop that is a bit unique. So I just wanted to make sure that you know that now, and you can gather those things as I go through my introduction and through these next few framing slides. So as I said, I shared my name. I use she, her pronouns, and I shared my title and role at Iowa and Minnesota Campus Compact. My email address is included in these slides. I can provide a link to the slides after the presentation is over if you want to go back and look through some of the resources. I have included some links throughout that could be useful for your reference in the future. I also wanted to acknowledge that I'm joining from St. Paul, Minnesota, and I am on the ancestral territory and homeland of the Wapakute Band of the Lakota Nation, and wanted to share this link as well. Perhaps many of you have seen this before, but native-land.ca is a great place to look to find the native land that you are currently doing your work and teaching and research on. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. I know that I have learned a lot from that particular link as well. The other thing that's on this slide that I wanted to start out with today, is our social change goal. We'll get back to that in just a second. But for right now, and with sort of an eye to time, I would love it if you all would in the chat share your name, your pronouns, your role, that brings you to the workshop today, and one big issue or social problem that concerns you and or influences your work. We'll get a chance to debrief some of these later, but go ahead and just type those into the chat so you all can get a sense of who's in the room, and I can also get a sense of that as we move forward to more interaction in the workshop. So again, name, pronouns, role, and one big issue or social problem that concerns you and or influences your work. So I'll see if those start popping up at the chat. But for now, I'm going to continue on. Feel free to continue to respond to the prompt as we're going. Thanks, folks, for sharing that. I appreciate it. So we're talking about community engaged learning in the big picture. And certainly this year, I think there have been a lot of ways in which we've been prompted to think about bigger pictures as we go through this pandemic together, as we think about the pandemic of COVID-19 and other sort of pandemic conditions or entrenched social issues that are affecting our work, scholarship, and teaching in the world today. So one thing that we did this year at IOM Minnesota Campus Compact is we revisited our social change wheel. I know there have been workshops offered at University of Iowa in the past around this, but I wanted to revisit this tool just as a means of framing. So this is the new refreshed tool. You'll see it centers around anti-racism, equity, and co-creation. And there are two wheels in our new social change wheel formulation. An inner wheel that focuses on campus-based strategies that we find frequently in community engaged teaching or community engaged learning and community engagement. And then an outer wheel with sort of broader strategies and approaches or ways to work towards social change. So here is a spotlight on that outer wheel, and you'll see perhaps some types of approaches or strategies that might be resonant for you. Again, links will be available in this if you want to go and check out the resources that are attached to this. And then here, zooming in, I wanted to spend a little bit of time here as we think through campus-based strategies. Operating from a university campus, what are the main ways in which campuses engage with civic and community engaged learning, partnerships, and work and collaboration? So we'll come back to this graphic in a second, and I'll ask you to do some reflection. But I wanted to share that the reason that we had sort of revamped this tool this year was to really make entryways into community engagement and civic engagement and partnership with community and in community to feel like a broad invitation. So again, the wheel now combines this larger social context and broader themes, engagements, and strategies with this campus-specific context. And we're hoping that the result for that is a way to think through a wide variety of pathways, on-ramps, and entry points into thinking about social change. So this is sort of the broad Campus Compact container for the content today. I also wanted to share, again, in using this tool as a frame, we'll come back to it at the very end as well, as we think through the material today, that are kinds of additions to this wheel, as well as points of context and sort of grounding foundational points of using this tool, is that for us, anti-racism, equity, and co-creation are always at the center as aspirations in the work we do together. Community needs must come first. Flexibility is imperative now during COVID times, but really always thinking about ways in which we can flex and pivot to accommodate as the work shifts and changes, which I hope you'll find is a theme today as well. We also wanted to note in our revisioning of this particular tool that not all social change happens off campus. There's a lot of work that can happen in the context of campus-based strategies as well and on campus. And also that not all social change requires a community partner. There can be a lot of different ways that self-work, dialogue in classrooms, and courses can play a really important role in connecting students to thinking broader about how they might act toward making the world a better place. And so with that theme in mind and that sort of framing, I wanted to invite, and this is where that pencil and paper might help. These are for your own purposes, and then also there is an exercise to share out in the chat to do a bit of reflection. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes, And again, I said we come back to the center ring of the wheel. You'll see that there are 8 strategies here that are identified as campus-based strategies: community building and partnership, student involvement and leadership development, information, digital and media literacies, cultivating lifelong learners and global citizens, voicing the public purposes of higher education, engaged scholarship and participatory research, community engaged teaching and learning, and civic-minded career readiness. Now, if it's the first time you've seen this or you've seen this a lot before, I invite you in the chat to comment. I'll set the timer. What is the campus-based strategy included here that most significantly shapes your day-to-day work? And how and/or for what purposes or goals do you use that strategy in your work? We'll have it shared out in the chat. And again, we can return to that as we go through the frames of our work today. So I'm going to set my timer here and I'll let you know, but go ahead and just look at the wheel and complete that reflective exercise. There's a little under 2 minutes left. Just under a minute left. So as you're wrapping up, please feel free, it's by invitation, but please feel free to share out your responses in the chat. And I hope my microphone caught that, but that is the sound of the timer buzzing. So again, if you feel so moved, please feel free to share your responses in the chat about the campus-based strategy that most significantly shapes your day-to-day work and the purposes and goals for that work. If you don't feel like sharing right now, again, we'll circle back to this. My goal in sharing out this diagram at the beginning of this is really to ground what we're going to be talking about next in these sort of common, promising practices, best practices for doing community engagement work. So the next invitation that I'll make to you, and this is a smaller thing, so just as I'm talking, on your piece of paper or however you're keeping notes, if you want to jot down or keep in your mind a class that you're currently teaching or that you'd like to teach where you would feel comfortable experimenting. So perhaps you came with that course in mind, but just to make it a bit more concrete, please think about that class now, jot it down or make a mental note. And think about this as we go through the next few slides. So we're going to zoom out into this idea of wicked problems as a frame for thinking about community engaged learning and also about course design a little bit more broadly. So here is a graphic from the dilemmas in general theory of planning, right? Wicked problems is a framework coming out of urban planning, actually, that has 10 properties of the wickedness of wicked problems here. So there's no clear definition, a no stopping rule. Solutions are not right or wrong, but better or worse. There's no immediate or ultimate test for a solution to this problem. One-shot solutions have consequences that can actually exacerbate the problem. No final end to solutions. It's an enduring problem that goes on and on. It's a unique problem. Every problem is a symptom of another. Solutions can be limited by a particular worldview. There's no right to be wrong about this particular problem. And also, these problems often elude clear definition, which makes them particularly troubling and why they can be so entrenched and often are systemic in nature. So in case folks, just to give another sort of view of wicked problems, some folks may have encountered this framework before, but I wanted to play to this short video on wicked problems. So take a look, it's only about a minute long, but it gives a sense of an overview of what wicked problems are and offers a few examples. Also, I've shared my sound, but if for some reason it doesn't come through, if someone could pop in the chat, that would be fabulous.
A wicked problem is a complex social problem, with some being worse than others. They are difficult to solve because there is incomplete knowledge, too many opinions involved. They are interconnected with other problems. They resist resolution, and they are a large economic burden. So what is a wicked problem? They have no formula. They bleed into each other. There's always more than one explanation. Solving one can reveal or even create another. They are unique, and each solution is a one-shot attempt, so there's no room for trial and error. Wicked problems are far too complex to be fixed. However, they can be reduced, influenced, disrupted, and directed with design thinking. Design thinking puts people first. It connects people. It inspires new ideas, and hopefully it can bring new solutions to the world. A wicked problem is a complex.
All right, so giving just an example and fleshing out that definition a little bit more of what might constitute a wicked problem. And also teasing too that what we'll move into next in some interactive activities is exploring some elements of design thinking that can help us think through how a wicked problems framework could help to inform course design. So I'm going to invite you to do another reflective activity here, another looking in. So thinking about that course that came to your mind, think about the course that you chose at the start of the workshop just a few minutes ago. And from this definition of wicked problems, or just this sort of characteristics of wicked problems, what are wicked problems related to that course? What are some unrelated wicked problems that the skills and content learned in your course might help a student solve? And what are some of the wicked problems that students in your major more generally, or if you don't have a major, if it's a field, your field or program might generally face or will face in the course of their work? So please just take a few minutes to note down your answers to this question. And we will then have some time in just a moment to come back together and discuss those. So to that end, I think what I'll do now, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share. I'll give you folks a few minutes to just jot down answers to those. Let me plug the questions into the chat here. So as you're kind of writing, I will plug questions, the questions from the slides into the chat. Just a second. Zoom makes everything just a little bit more fun, doesn't it? A little bit more wicked. Here we go. So think about that course. Just take a couple minutes and maybe around 2:56 or so, right? As you're sort of thinking through this, we'll come together and we can have some conversation in the room. I'll invite folks to contribute. What wicked problems are you thinking about? And what kind of course have you identified? I've also seen some folks saying, if you're not teaching specifically, please feel free to engage, as this is suggested, in a thought experiment. So what context would this make sense for you? So we'll come back together in about a minute or so. All right. I know that isn't a ton of time to reflect, but from sort of your introductions in the chat, from the reflection you've done so far, is there anyone who would like to share the course they're thinking about and maybe some of the wicked problems that come to mind for them as they're thinking about their course in the context of this framework of wicked problems?
You know, this is Jill, and I teach at the University of Iowa College of Business, and the idea of wicked problems is very interesting because it's so layered. But, and I have teams of students that work with community partners, and some of the unrelated wicked problems maybe is that building both the skills of the teams of students and the community partners to work on team-based approach to things. So the skills and the content is being able to strengthen the skills to work in diverse teams and work with diverse teams. And then sort of a sub-layer is that involves a communication and problem solving skills. And so those are teachable. I'm really looking at strengthening team skills sort of as a low level wicked problem right now, because we know the research is out there that diverse teams really can do awesome work, but it's getting the initial teamness together to draw on the skills of everybody in the team to approach some of the wicked problems out in the communities. I don't know if that makes sense.
It absolutely does, Jill, and I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think as we get later into the presentation, there is a framework I've already borrowed from it for these questions around this idea of wicked students, teaching wicked students, which I think might also help you to think through some of this idea of connecting the skills you're teaching in your course to the eventual ability for students to approach these larger, more systemic problems. And of course, working in diverse teams. I had mentioned to Nick before, another thing that just came out this week that might be useful for that is AACNU just released, every 2 years, they do a survey of employers, and working in diverse teams is a skill that employers, as you know well and better than I probably do, it's a very, very attractive skill, right, for students to also market themselves to get jobs. And that was something highlighted in that report. So I'll pop a link to that too in the resources too. We have time for one more if anyone else would like to share sort of their general observation so far about wicked problems in their course before we move to our next activity.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brady. I'm one of the associate curators of education at the Stanley Museum of Art on campus. And this is a fun kind of thought experiment for me because I don't currently teach courses, but that may be in the future as the museum is getting ready to launch our new building on campus and everything. And so I guess my wicked problem is more of a, thinking about how one of the things we would like to do is create a course that allows students to gain the skills to be, to facilitate school visits and work with students. But figuring out how to do that on a student time frame and in the bounds of a class with the limitations that courses have in terms of time and scheduling, and thinking about the reality of how we'll be able to get students to have time to engage with school groups, which was something I really couldn't do until I was a graduate student and had many fewer hours of class in the week. To sort of, to like actually facilitate the connections and let this group of students meet the community that we want them to work with.
Great. Thank you so much, Brady, for sharing that. That's really, again, I think that's a challenge too, that as we move forward in the content, hopefully in breakout room conversations or in our large group debrief, or if folks have thoughts in the chat, maybe there'll be some solutions that will emerge to help with that. That's an exciting prospect. I'm happy for you. That's cool.
And Jay, can I jump in for 1 second?
Please, Nick. Yeah.
So I wanted to say this idea of wicked problems. So I have my master's in urban planning, and I thought about wicked problems as a concept for a long time. One of the things I would say is that as I look around the folks that I know here in the chat, all of you are working on issues that are wicked problems. And I see Stratus here, and he and I are part of an environmental justice working group right now that's looking at trying to advance environmental justice education and scholarship at the university, and talk about a wicked problem and figuring out how do we teach to it. And so my issue is thinking about this from the context of, if we think about environmental justice as a wicked problem, how does that play into engaged experiences that we develop for students who might be involved in the environmental justice work that's going to be going on at the university or is going on? So I love this framework, and it's something where my head is at a lot with this. So
awesome. Thank you, Nick. That's really helpful. Did I hear someone else jumping in?
Yeah, this is Stratus. I was sitting back thinking about like how I use the term wicked problem a lot associated with climate change.
Yes.
But I've been talking about climate change as a wicked problem for many years, and I've never actually seen the definition, the 10 ways to think about it, express it, or those kind of videos. I've never bothered, I'll admit, I've never bothered to actually figure out what the actual languages of wicked problem, other than, so this is really useful for me to think about how I've been maybe misrepresenting some of, the ways of thinking about it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I do want to say, in the spirit of wicked problems, right, this is not the one answer, the one conception either, but hopefully my goal is to also give you some tools where if you wanted to introduce this in the class, there might be a couple of different activities or frames you could use as well, even with students, to help to make this a little bit more clear. And to that end, when we get to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which, spoiler alert, right, it's pretty much all wicked problems and what those goals are trying to address, to really come back to this definition. And then our next activity is really going to think through mental models about how folks conceptualize, how we all conceptualize approaches to mapping ideas and processes, and how that can help us to think about wicked problems. So we'll get to the bigger examples later in the workshop, but I wanted to start small to sort of scaffold toward that, for the reason that it might be easier to introduce it this way in the context of a course. So I'm going to go ahead and get back to my presentation. And now is going to be the time that, ignore the thing about Jamboard. We're just going to use a piece of paper. I was going to make things more complicated, but I figured this one we could keep simple for the purposes of our time together. So what we're going to do now is use an exercise around making toast, which some of you may have seen before, to again explore this idea of mental models and how that can help us make sense of systems models as an approach to thinking through this concept of wicked problems and connecting them to the wicked problems you are noticing or want to center in thinking through your course. So 3 minutes is the word. On your sheet of paper, take out a sheet of paper and take 3 minutes and draw how to make toast. That's really what to do. So take 3 minutes and draw how to make toast. You will be sharing this drawing in a breakout room. And what I'm going to do now too is I have this big timer. I'll set this up here so you can have a sense of how much time remains here. All right, well, welcome back, everyone. I hope the small time to kind of compare the drawings and compare notes gave you some opportunity to interact. We will have a chance to debrief that conversation after we talk about the so what. Okay, great. You drew toast. You compared some ways that you mapped out drawing toast. We'll share out in a group in just a few minutes. But what I want to get to now is that, okay, so we've talked about toast. We've drawn it. We've compared notes. So what? How does drawing how to make toast relate to wicked problems? So what I'd like to do now is we're going to take a look at this video. We're just going to watch the first portion of it. It's about 4 minutes long. And after this video is done, I will share some reflection that hopefully will help to bring it all together. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Wujek to get us started.
Some years ago, I stumbled across a simple design exercise that helps people understand and solve complex problems. And like many of these design exercises, it kind of seems trivial at first, but under deep inspection, it turns out that it reveals unexpected truths about the way that we collaborate and make sense of things. The exercise has 3 parts, and it begins with something that we all know how to do, which is how to make toast. It begins with a clean sheet of paper, a felt marker, and without using any words, you begin to draw how to make toast. And most people draw something like this. They draw a loaf of bread, which is sliced, that put into a toaster. The toaster is then deposited for a course of time. It pops up, and then voila, after 2 minutes, toast and happiness. Now, over the years, I've collected many hundreds of drawings of these toasts, and some of them are very good because they really illustrate the toast-making process quite clearly. And then there are some that are, well, not so good. They really suck, actually, because you don't know what they're trying to say. Under close inspection, some reveal some aspects of toast making while hiding others. So there's some that's all about the toast, right? And there's all about the transformation of toast. And there's others that are all about the toaster, okay? And the engineers love to draw the mechanics of this. And then there are others that are about people. You know, it's about visualizing the experience that people have. And then there are others that are about the supply chain of making toast that goes all the way back to the store. It goes through the supply chain networks of teleportation and all the way back to the field and wheat. And that one actually goes all the way back to the Big Bang. So it's crazy stuff. But I think it's obvious that even though these drawings are really wildly different, they share a common quality. And I'm wondering if you can see it. Do you see it? What's common about these? So most drawings have nodes and links. So nodes represent the tangible objects like the toaster and people, and links represent the connections between the nodes. And it's the combination of links and nodes that produces a full systems model. It makes our private mental models visible about how we think something works. So that's the value of these things. And what's interesting about these systems models is how they reveal our various points of view. So for example, Americans make toast with a toaster. That seems obvious. Whereas many Europeans make toast with a frying pan, of course. And many students make toast with a fire. I don't really understand this. A lot of MBA students do this. So you can measure the complexity by counting the number of nodes, and the average illustration has between 4 and 8 nodes. Less than that, the drawing seems trivial, but it's quick to understand. And more than 13, the drawing produces a feeling of map shock. It's too complex. So the sweet spot is between 5 and 13. So if you want to communicate something visually, have between 5 and 13 nodes in your diagram. So though we may not be skilled at drawing, the point is that we intuitively know how to break down complex things into simple things and then bring them back together again. So this brings us to our second part of the exercise, which is how to make.
Okay, so hate to leave you in suspense about the second part of the exercise, but really for our purposes today, the takeaway that I wanted to share with you that comes from this framework of Draw Toast as an introduction into thinking about design thinking and systems models is this idea of breaking down a complex process into these nodes, right? And the connection between the nodes or the links, which can take on a variety of different kinds of forms and shapes. Based on your own mental models, right, of how you understand these different processes and the connections between the nodes and links. One thing that we won't do together today, but using this idea of making toast, right, can be a way to map all kinds of other things, right? What are the nodes and links in different kinds of problems and different kinds of systems and different kinds of processes. And in the slides that I'll send out afterward, this will be linked as well if you want to go look at the resources that are available to on the Draw Toast website. Oh, good. I'm glad I saw someone say they're going to use it in class. It can be kind of a great way to hook students in and, you know, sometimes other folks as well. So I found it to be a useful framework, and there's some great resources on this website. So what I'd like to do now, I'm going to go ahead and, oops, I went to the link. Well, this is a good time for me actually to stop my share here. We'll come back here, go to this. There we go. So we're going to go back to looking in, and now we're going to have some time with the group here. We're not going to go back into a breakout room, and I'll post these questions in the chat in just a moment too. But I'm curious, what were the nodes and links in your systems models when you thought about drawing toast? What did you notice or learn from colleagues or your colleague in your breakout room? And did it mirror what was described in the video in any way? And perhaps the juicier question of the three, as opposed to the drier toast. I'll take that joke for now. How could a systems model, this idea of the nodes and the links, help you and your students to approach the wicked problems you identified in the earlier reflective exercise? So I'm going to stop the share there, and I'm going to again paste these questions into the chat. But feel free, either speak out into the room, or if you want to type in the chat, what's on your mind in terms of thinking about this when you're looking at this process and thinking about systems model? And I see a few folks had to leave us, which is okay. I get it.
I was really amazed at how similar Catherine and my drawings were. It was really odd to think that we're so conditioned with, I don't know if it's imagery to, you know, because I could, do you want to show yours, Catherine? I'll put mine up and they can see. So I guess there's mine. And then if you look at hers, it looks exactly, it's the same kind of just the arrows in the process and the toast. I don't know, that it's interesting that how we don't think that differently about these things. Maybe that's bad, I don't know.
I think similar stuff. Okay, similar steps Catherine is saying. Catherine, would you like to share more about that? Did you notice the same thing?
Yeah, our drawings are really similar, and I sort of wonder, I mean, I can't read too much into Stratus's and my perspectives on toast because that seems, maybe not the best thing to think about from a larger perspective, but we've come from a similar environment. I think we highlighted the same issues on that wheel that matter to us in our work. So who knows how deep this toast thing goes? Maybe coming from very similar settings, you have similar approaches to creating nodal networks. I don't know, similar over the steps. But he did have 3D shapes. So I think his drawing took the cake, really.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think too, this brings into question, and the video sort of touched on this too, this idea of cultural context too matters as well. And I think particularly as we move forward in this and thinking about wicked problems that are cross-cultural, right, are going to have to, I mean, even back to the what Jill shared about this idea of diverse teams, right? Making a note of what are the cultural contexts that are operating, what are the assumptions being made, right? The toaster versus the frying pan, if you will. I think this can also be a way to introduce those topics in a way that students might not think about in the same, from that lens, right? Any other takeaways that folks want to share?
I was going to say, I thought I was paired up with Nick, and what I loved about his drawing is he had a little person in it. And it was also interesting scale wise, because like I took this whole page and kind of, did very schematic drawings here, and, and Nick's was so much more, compact. But again, we both went for the similar classic, like what we call in my family, the brave little toaster, the metal one with the 2 slots in it. But it was, I love the idea of thinking about, the nodes. We had very similar nodes in ours. And I think those similar kind of connectors, which I think, kind of everybody, thinking about arrows and kind of a movement across the page. And then in my case, because I drew it huge, also down the page.
But I would say that I had similar experience of, I thought that mine was going to be so different. Like I was like, like everybody's going to be like, what is he drawing? Like that's not what it is, but it is all sort of similar, So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, I guess that's I inartfully commented when I said it, but that was my point, was that it was scary that we're thinking alike and we're all in academia here. We're all at the University of Iowa. And then you think about solving a problem. I come from some of a development background, working in international development stuff, and thinking about the end user and not being able to think differently about the problem. You're just not going to solve it. And that's my experience. And here we are teaching students, and we and it's an N of 2 or 3 or whatever, but I get the sense that we'd all have a similar approach to thinking about this problem, and that could be a challenge.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I mean, personally, I live with a user experience architect now, user experience designer. So the sticker from Nielsen Norman, right? You are not the user. So I think thinking about that too, with problem solving, right? What assumptions are you making that work for you, but really might not reflect the mental model of the folks that you're collaborating with or trying to come into communication with? Thanks, Jill. If you have to take off, that's okay. But maybe this is a good time to transition to, let me go back to the Zoom call. There we go, share again. I have so many windows open. This is good learning for me as well. To not have quite so many windows. Okay, so what I'd like to do for this next segment, and we'll have some more activities here. And again, we're going to move more into this space of skill sets for engaging in complexity, in engaging across different kinds of mental models, and in thinking about wicked problems and embracing that kind of ambiguity, complexity, the enduring nature of them. How does that translate to skill sets that we want to cultivate in our students? And so the Paul Hanstedt, who is the author of the book, the prompts that we started with came from him. He has this book out, this is from 2018 from Stylus Press, Creating Wicked Students, Designing Courses for a Complex World. And he wrote, this is, wow, that's a lot of text, but he's also written some essays during the pandemic, and he's been a guest on several teaching and learning podcasts. This last week, well, yesterday, he was featured on the Bringing Theory to Practice podcast. I have a link to that conversation in just a couple of slides. But he really kind of surfaced this idea. He works primarily in the space of general education design and redesign, but also thinking about problem-based learning and how that can really expansively bring in things like community engaged learning as a place of strength, where students can start to grapple with the world not fitting into neat little boxes. And so in the essay he wrote last year, about a year ago, for Inside Higher Ed, he talked about this idea of boxes, right? So essentially, students are often led to this sort of false sense of security in terms of having a clear sense of the rules all of the time, right? Here is my class schedule. He says Gen Ed is a place where students might bump into different kinds of thinking or more complexity, but he writes, but otherwise, each to its own little box, and every box is reinforced by almost every other dimension of institutional rhetoric. From the opening question we ask students when they first walk on campus, what's your major? To the closing design of the college transcript with its clear disciplinary designations. He goes on. In contrast, though, right, coming back to our conversation today, the world is a messy place. I've written elsewhere in his book, Creating Wicked Students, of the contrast between the static university and a dynamic world filled with wicked problems. Arising from city planning before being adopted in engineering, the concept of the wicked problem refers to challenges that are dynamic and changing, resistant to simple solutions, even solutions that may have been effective in the past. Think poverty, think addiction, think the 2016 election, where fake news, social media, automation, and a changing economy created a swirl of misinformation and toxic political dysfunction. Think COVID-19. If nothing else, the global pandemic is breaking the boundary between static university learning and the wicked fluidity of the world. So for Hanstead, this moment really was an invitation in thinking about, folks talk about, well, there's vaccines coming and we're going to go back to some kind of normal. But we're not going to go back, right? So what is this new normal? And Hanstead sees this as a place to invite students and invite educators, faculty, instructors, others who are participating in education to think about breaking down that binary and really embracing this fluidity and this messiness. This is a link again on the slide to his most recent interview that I could find, In a Time of Wicked Problems, Educate Wicked Students. This is also a really great resource too, Bringing Theory to Practice, does all kinds of work in the space of sort of solving these larger systemic wicked problems, and their Way Forward podcast, Higher Education in a Time of Crisis. There are 3 episodes so far. The second episode was an interview with Nancy Cantor, Chancellor of Rutgers University right now. Really fascinating stuff. So check out those episodes. But this conversation I found to be really fascinating too. He digs a little deeper into the stuff he introduced in that essay. But he brings it back to what makes a wicked student a good student. This is a link to an infographic that Wiley put together, so you can click on this and visit that. But I distilled sort of the characteristics that Hanstead identifies for wicked students into this slide, which I hope will sort of resonate with you. Wicked students can translate information and ideas from one subject area to another. They can argue for a solution instead of finding the correct answer. They can understand that the world is a complex place, solve novel or unrecognizable problems, adapt ideas and technology from one area to another, and they can fail and then try again. So what Hanstead really is getting at in incorporating opportunities for students to embrace this identity as sort of a wicked student, right? That helping students make sense of how they can enter in to the conversation around wicked problems can be a really powerful strategy in a classroom to cultivate these kinds of dispositions and attitudes. And I would argue, kind of going back to the social change wheel too, that this kind of student is exactly the sort of student, and these kinds of outcomes really, or dispositions really mirror what a lot of folks are trying to get at when they are engaging students in community engaged collaborations and projects and courses. He goes on further in his essay from last year. We are teachers. What drives us is the desire to see our students grow, to rise into their best selves, to achieve a sense of their capacity to enter the world as agents of thoughtful, ethical, and meaningful change. If we're wise, we'll use this COVID-19 pandemic moment to help our students better understand the complexity of the world beyond the walls of academe, the ways in which our various fields and disciplines not only overlap, but also influence and shape and reshape each other in substantive ways. So again, also this fluidity, right? Universities often made of silos, made of hierarchies. How can we see the fluidity between the boundaries that are kind of artificially constructed to help us come together to think about collaborating for change? And so for me, Hanstedt's work really transitions into this short video that I'll show, introducing the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which many of you may have already been familiar with these, but I wanted to play this video. It's a few minutes long, just to give a sense, an overview of what these Sustainable Development Goals are. You will then be invited to reflect on Sustainable Development Goals in the context of your own discipline and your own courses. So keep that in the back of your mind, keep that course in the back of your mind, and think about which of these goals are resonating with you. So I'm going to turn it over to a bunch of celebrities now.
We can be.
We must be
the first generation
to end extreme poverty.
The generation
Most determined
to fight injustice
and inequalities.
The generation that saves the planet from climate change.
And this is how it will get done. The global goals.
A 15-year plan
For everyone. Everywhere.
With no one left behind.
We will live in a world
where nobody
anywhere
lives in extreme poverty.
Where no one
goes hungry.
where no one
wakes in the morning
Asking if there will be food today.
We will live in a world where no child has to die.
Diseases we know how to cure. And where proper health care
is a lifelong right for us all.
We will live in a world
where everyone
goes to school. And education gives us the knowledge
and skills
for a fulfilling life.
We will live in a world where all girls and all women have equal opportunities
to thrive
and be powerful
and safe.
We cannot succeed if half the world is held back. We will live in a world
where all people can get clean water
and proper toilets at home,
at school,
and at work.
We will live in a world where
there's sustainable energy for everyone.
Heat, light,
and power for the whole planet.
without destroying the planet.
We'll live in a world where economies prosper.
A new wealth
Leads to decent jobs
for everyone.
And we will live in a world where our industry,
our infrastructure, and our
Best innovations
Are not just used to make money, but to make all our lives better.
We will live in a world
Where prejudices and extremes of inequality
Are defeated
inside our countries,
and between different countries.
where people live in cities and communities
that are safe, progressive,
and support everyone who lives there.
where we replace
what we consume.
Planet where we put back
what we take out of the earth.
We live in a world that is decisively rolling back the threat of climate
change.
where we restore and protect the life in our oceans and seas. We'll restore
and protect
Life on land,
The forests,
animals,
the earth itself.
with peace between and inside countries.
where all governments are open.
And answer to us for what they do at home and abroad.
And the justice rules.
with everyone equal before the law.
Where all countries and we their people,
Work together.
in partnerships of all kinds,
To make these goals a reality.
These are the United Nations global goals.
for sustainable development.
Let's get to work.
So that's an overview of the Sustainable Development Goals. Here's sort of the glossy framework. I will say this is, of course, a framework. I believe this video is from, I didn't note the date of it, but I think it's from 2013 or 2014. So it's, clearly wicked problems also in certain ways can intervene in different ways, and even the glossiest, right, of rollout materials for initiatives like this. But again, this is an ongoing project. And it is a good framework, right, for thinking about all of these and looking at them. These are sort of the quintessential, or at least a good distillation of the wicked problems that do really affect us in our local communities and thinking to global communities as well. And so in thinking through what we've sort of worked through pretty quickly so far today together, I'd like to invite you to do a reflective activity. So the Jamboard activity, we're going to do a Jamboard activity, and the tiny URL that is here, this link. Jonathan, would you mind terribly in the chat right at the beginning when we started, could you paste that Jamboard link for folks in the chat so they can log on to it? It's the link that says Jamboard. I'm going to invite you into a Google Jamboard. If folks haven't seen this before, I might stop this share and just walk through so you can see. I'm hoping it'll be fairly intuitive. Look at the chat here. So there'll be two prompts. There's two frames, two different slides you can go through in the Jamboard. In the first frame, I'd like to invite you to put a plus sign next to the goals that connect with your field and or discipline. And on the second frame, I'd like to invite you to star 1 to 3 goals that are most connected to your teaching and or research. And to help with that, oh, perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to go ahead. I will share my Jamboard just so you can see. Let me see here. Exit screen sharing. Here we go. So let's see if I go here. The Jamboard. I'll just give you a little look around. We'll just take a few minutes to do this together. So this is a Google Jamboard. This is an image, right? So you're not going to be able to move too much around. So you'll see here the instructions. This is the first frame. Use the pen tool to mark a plus sign next to the goals that align with your field or discipline. You can use the top, this little button here, this arrow button, to toggle to the next frame. So there's just 2. So the way that you use this is you click on your pen, and you can choose your color too if you want, and you can make a plus, right, using this drawing tool, right? So what I'll invite you all to do, I'll go ahead to stop the share again, and just, again, the 2 frames, identify with the plus sign as it says on the first frame, what aligns with your field or discipline, and a star on the second frame, what aligns with your own teaching and research goals. So let's take till 3:45 to do that, and then we can come together and sort of tie all these different ends together. So feel free to go in the Jamboard. If you have questions about the Jamboard, you can, raise your hand or just let me know. I'll keep a watch on it too to see if anything comes up there. Oh, that's so cool. I'm seeing the stars emerging. So what I just wanted to invite you all to think through together for a few minutes here, sort of what are you noticing in clusters or, where there are gaps, and how might this kind of an exercise or this sort of an annotation help to support collaboration toward thinking about preparing students or preparing students to think about approaching these goals or coming into conversation about these goals. What are you folks noticing on either of those counts?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
I guess maybe the question I should just ask right now is, what are you noticing? What do you notice in yourself with this exercise? And also just in seeing patterns emerge as you're seeing other folks annotate the Jamboard as well.
I think one of the things that I mean, part of it's just because of the people that are in this room right now. But I think that there's a lot of, and actually, Catherine mentioned this in the chat, that there's a lot of people are working in a lot of different areas. And I think that one of our challenges at the University of Iowa is figuring out how do we get those collaborations to really overlap, and then how do we advance the causes in a way that's effective. But people are working on a lot of these issues, which is, it's interesting because you also think about, like, is the University of Iowa leading the way and with the UN Sustainable Development Goals? Like, I'd let Stratus answer that before I would, but I mean, I would say, well, I don't know, it doesn't seem like it, but it seems like a lot of people are working on these issues, you know what I mean? So.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, I've been working with SDGs for a long time, and my thinking on them has evolved. It used to be that I would look at them and think, yeah, everything on this list is great, and I get that sustainable development has to be inclusive, but I really care about biodiversity and I care about stopping climate change. And now, within the last couple of years, I've really dropped the environmental part of sustainability or minimized it, and I think sustainability is about equity, because if you want to solve the problem of unsustainability, and you don't have equity at the front of your thinking, not only is it unethical, right? It's also, you're just not going to solve it. Because the reason I can throw my trash elsewhere and burn coal is because it's not immediately impacting me. So there's this displacement of benefits and harms. And so making those connections to the systems thinking of sustainability has brought me back to thinking it differently. So the SDG goals are something I revisit all the time and think, like, how do I think differently about this after a year has passed?
Thank you for that. I think too, I'm curious if you thinking about these in the, like, revisiting too, thinking about them in the boxes, is that the most useful way of thinking about them, especially with that expansive definition of sustainability?
I mean, it's helpful. I think, you can't think of it as, so we have to break things out in, what's it? All models are bad, some are helpful, right? So I think that for me, it's anything that forces me to change my position in the room or change my point of view a bit can illuminate things. And so I think it's, when I go through it, I could click every box, or I could click none of it. It just depends on, so it's a nice exercise to actually look at them visually, I find, and then say, why should hunger matter to me? How tangential is that? Like, why is this, hunger is blown up, you could say, like, in Eastern Syria, right? That drought led to these consequences that destabilize political systems. So how are you talking about sustainability if you're not talking about people can eat? And so I think that you start to think in systems when you look at something like this, that breaks it out into pieces artificially.
Yeah. Thank you. Other folks, other thoughts on doing this exercise? How many folks had used the SDGs a lot in past work? Brady has. Stratus has. Nick has. Have you been invited? I'm curious. Are there other ways in which this framework has been? How have you used it, sort of as a convening, right, or as a document or framework to facilitate conversation?
We've actually used them in the Office of Community Engagement as a framework for communities to consider ways to work with the University of Iowa. So we have a program at the University, Iowa Initiative for Sustainable Communities, that actually lays out the UN Sustainable Development Goals for communities when we are considering working with them. And they actually think about their own needs within the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's actually been a way for us to help frame community partnerships.
Yeah, I mean, I think I already sort of mentioned this, but I use it when I present it as a way of helping make the argument that the sustainability is not about bike share and recycling, right? That it's something very different, and having to make that argument from scratch over and over is different than saying, here's the SDGs, and the UN has helped define these areas. People can see some of their work in them. So it's a way that I can cheat to get into answers I want to that are not, where the Office of Recycling and Bike Share.
Okay. From a global health studies perspective, the way that we do global health studies at the University of Iowa, it's a liberal arts degree. It's not a clinical degree. It's not in public health. It's not in Carver. And it's a social determinants of health. So implicitly, we're addressing everything. So I think I start almost every single thing. So that's an implicit way. More explicitly, and I don't mean to be a naysayer at all, because that's, of course, the development goals are an important model, paradigm, whatever. But I will want to note that one of our faculty, Dr. Carly Nichols, she's in Global Health Studies and Geography, is teaching a course which casts kind of a critical analysis of the goals. So I want to bring everyone's attention to that as well. That there's a lot of community-based approaches to these things as well that do, ask us to consider sort of the geopolitical history of the paradigm. So I'm putting that, she's teaching it now in spring, so you can look at her course description as well.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I know recently too, I'm trying to find the link to it and I can send it along with resources, but I know there was a recent event in the CUNY system or SUNY system around food systems specifically that was very critical of this approach. And so I think that's a really important layer to bring onto it, particularly in thinking about anti-racism, equity, and co-creation, right? Who is represented, who's creating these goals and these benchmarks, I think is a really interesting invitation into to think about how power moves around these wicked problems.
One of the things that I try to work with campus on is allowing communities to help, and local communities to help direct the conversation. And so you could use the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a framework, but I think when we think about our classes and we think about what we teach, and particularly in relation to engaged learning, allowing communities to help drive the conversation grounds our work and the authenticity of what's actually happening within local communities. And I think that that's something that is, it's like, these frameworks can sort of, they look shiny and they look kind of like a particular way. And they're based off of, even having celebrities present it, it's like this sort of one particular approach. But I think then when you drill down to, one of the things I think is so interesting is taking these big issues, but then grounding them in local communities and letting the local communities help describe what are they working on and what matters to them. It makes it more authentic to the actual engagement process.
Great. Well, we're coming up to the end of our time, so I wanted to, apparently it has decided to storm pretty intensely. There's hail against my window, which is hopefully, I don't know if you're picking that up or not, but that's here. That's climate change here. Let me go back to my presentation. I wanted just to end kind of coming back, because for me, the reason that we wanted again to start with this sort of grounding in this idea of ways to work towards social change and campus-based strategies that are typically aligned with community engagement in the service of social change, is to kind of bring it full circle, bring it back to the wheel and think about how these sorts of systems, the wicked problems, wicked students formulation or framework, this idea of systems model approach with nodes and links, foregrounding the nodal network that was brought up, or thinking about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, how might these frameworks help to shape your approach to community engaged learning in your course moving forward? So that's one thing I just wanted to offer as a prompt as we close today. And a simpler prompt too, is there a question, or what is one question that you're leaving with today? I'm going to stop the sharing again so I can see all of you, and I will share these questions in the chat again too, so we can preserve them. But if folks have thoughts just from seeing those, how these different approaches could connect with your approach to community engaged teaching, and or if there are any questions that folks are leaving with today, I'd love to hear them. I'm sure colleagues here would too.
I have to jump off for another meeting actually with a community partner. So I just want to say thank you to Jane and to the Office of Community Engagement for making these amazing opportunities. Poor Nick has had to see me, you know, this is our second time together, and he got put in a breakout room with me, so he's had to put up with a lot today. But you know, thank you so much. This was really fantastic. I loved also last semester when we had a speaker from Campus Compact, and you all have given me a lot to think about and take to my colleagues at the Art Museum. So thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, Brady. Be in touch if we can be helpful. Thanks for being here.
I love being in rooms with you, Brady. So let's do it more.
Yes. Okay, you're on.
All right.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Yeah. I think it's just us now, Stratus.
That's cool.
That's okay.
Stratus is
yeah.
great. Yeah.
No, this is really helpful. I thought, I mean, I don't have any like questions, but this is really helpful. It's just really great little ways, techniques to introduce ideas. And I think sometimes it's nice to just see someone have to be, other than me, you know, who's not faculty, think through these problems, who's maybe on the borderline of a practitioner, like someone like Nick, you know, and
yeah,
how much more willing people are to pull in ideas that aren't from some journal that might be more functional. And so I think it's been helpful. Thank you.
I do think about this in relation to our environmental justice group that we're a part of. And
yep, that's exactly my thought.
Yeah, and like I think we've got to really consider from the community engagement perspective how we're moving forward with this. And you know, there's just a lot of ways that we can try to incorporate some of this. And I think about, like, you know, the frameworks that we provide to students when we, and I even think about the class that we're teaching Stratus, or not teaching, but that we're leading on.
Right.
It's like, how are we setting things up for students to be able to be successful in figuring out how to talk about and work on all of these kind of problems? So.
Yeah, that's definitely the thoughts I had. So it's helpful to move that. This helped me move more in that direction. I'm like maybe 1% of the way there now instead of 0.5%.
I have to say too, coming into, I appreciate. So I came from a university. I've been in this role for like a year, a little over a year. And at my previous, and I'm still actually collaborating with these folks, but folks in public health, and particularly the director of sustainability there at Hamlin, was really helpful. I mean, obviously very engaged in community and building partnership, and talking about decolonizing pedagogy, all this kind of really, really helpful stuff. And I know there was a really great workshop, I think it was an ASHE workshop, that was North Hennepin Community College, a collaboration of North Hennepin Community College, Bemidji State University, and the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, particularly their St. Paul campus, where we talked about the intersection between, it was equity, sustainability, and community engagement. And it was just fascinating. The reason
so
this came—
was it Erica Bailey Johnson?
I believe it was, yes, it was.
Yeah, she's great.
Yes. So it's, I mean, I'm sure exactly, like, again, you're more in this network probably, but just getting a sampling of that, I know how much I learned too, and how going to that workshop maybe 4 or 5 years ago really shaped, it brought in such great frameworks for expanding the conversation. That's what I really appreciated with the different definitions of sustainability I've seen and how those have evolved. And working with the person I work with closely is Valentine Kidja, who was at the University of Minnesota and then came to Hamlin. But anyway, in Minnesota Network, they're doing an Earth Week series of programs too. So I can send that information over to Nick too, if that would be of interest.
That's
yeah.
very helpful. Really helpful.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. I appreciate you coming.
Yeah.
See you soon.
Talk to you later.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.